This week, Microsoft unveiled Windows 365. You may recall last week and on a couple of the other previous episodes of this podcast, I talked about a potential cloud PC offering and the fact that it was anticipated that it would be revealed this week. Well, it certainly was. As anticipated, this Windows 365 has been designed to provide a monthly pricing structure that includes all license entitlements, usage, and compute. This is very important because current offerings like Azure Virtual Desktop or just pretty much anything running a virtual machine within Azure can be a little erratic in terms of pricing since your compute can fluctuate. It's very difficult to know what it is you're going to end up owing at the end of the month or spending by the end of the month. With Windows 365, you just pay the same flat fee per user each month. Something I'm not sure of is whether or not a subscription can be paused and then picked back up or not. Like, for example, if one of my employees needs to take a long-term leave, how do you handle that for the desktop subscription? Do you still pay for a desktop that no one is using? That's a little unclear, and I guess more will be revealed as the offering gets launched. Unfortunately, they did not reveal that information or really much about the pricing either, and they say that will all be revealed on August 2nd when Cloud PC and Windows 365 is launched. Having said that, The Verge reported on a screenshot shown during the demos that seems to show at least one desktop configuration and its price. It was a business desktop with 2 CPUs, 4 gigs of memory, and 128 gig of storage, and it showed as $31 per user per month, which that's a pretty basic desktop, and $31 per user per month is a little on the pricey side in my opinion. Now, it was pointed out that this is not the cheapest possible option, and you could see that on the screenshot even. As you could see, there's an option to go down to 1 CPU, 2 gigs of memory, and even smaller storage, which that would not be a very performant desktop. Microsoft revealed some of the desktop configurations available for business customers who have 300 or less users and enterprise customers with larger workforces. The specs range from 1 CPU, 2 gigs of memory, and 64 gigs storage, which they say could work for frontline workers, call centers, education, training, CRM access, and allow access to Office Lite, which is the web-based Office 365, the Microsoft Edge browser, OneDrive, and lightweight line of business apps like call center web apps, and also you get Windows Defender support. So very, very much a task worker. I don't know if I'd even be confident with a desktop of that spec for a task worker, but that option is available. The high end at the moment at least seems to be 8 CPUs, 32 gigs of memory, and 512 gig storage. They say that could be suitable for software developers, engineers, content creators, and design and engineering workstations. That could include Microsoft 365 apps, Microsoft Teams, Outlook, Access, OneDrive, Adobe Reader, Edge, Power BI, Visual Studio Code, line of business apps, plus you also get the Windows Defender support. And even on the high end, they say design and engineering workstations and content creators. I don't know if I'd be giving that kind of desktop to those types of workers either. They didn't mention any GPU support, so that could limit some of those workers depending on the apps and the workflows that they use day to day. Personally, I think a beefy desktop that can be configured for remote access, like a physical desktop, could be a better option for some of those outliers. Now, for just general power users who are not necessarily using graphic-intensive applications, certainly that high spec would definitely work for them. During the launch event, they did talk about being able to resize the desktops, as well as the potential to have desktops resize automatically, plus the possibility to give users an option to resize the desktop themselves, which obviously you might only want to give that to executives or certain people because that's going to change the billing for the month too. Might be better to set it and then let them come to you and ask to get the desktop resized rather than allowing to automatically do it or to actually allow users to self-service and do it. It's not just this flat pricing model that makes this different to Azure Virtual Desktop. The Cloud PC is purely one-to-one, so there's not going to be a multi-session Windows 10 option available by the looks of things. One good or bad thing with the one-to-one approach is that it's more like a traditional physical desktop that you give to a user. It really is like a personal computer. It is persistent, and you don't need profile management. Scott Manchester from Microsoft did a brief demo showing the provisioning of these cloud PCs using Microsoft Endpoint Manager, showing that you could select to build the desktop with a set spec and using an image available in the Azure gallery, or you could select to use a custom image. You can also use MEM for patching your desktops, for deploying applications, setting policies, and more. So this is obviously a big mental shift for anyone who's used Azure Virtual Desktop. As the name suggests, it's more like managing a regular PC. You build it, and then it's a persistent desktop that you will need to manage from that point on, rather than with a non-persistent tearaway pooled desktop, you make a change to an image that's centrally managed, and then just kind of tear away or recompose those desktops at log off or at a set interval or schedule. So kind of different if you're used to maybe Citrix or VMware Horizon, where you recompose desktops, or PVS, just reboot with the new vDisk or new version attached, or MCS with Snap. It's a very different way of thinking. It's more like the traditional physical PC. The cloud PC should be pretty resilient since it's running on a cloud infrastructure and has been built with a zero trust approach. Now that zero trust approach is kind of from architecture or infrastructure design standpoint. Doesn't necessarily mean that the desktop itself is going to be bulletproof once you put users on there. I would recommend you use something like PolicyPak Least Privilege Manager to secure the actual OS and the desktop itself. And then you can be pretty happy because you'll have a secure desktop, plus that zero trust for the infrastructure and the intertwined dependencies. The desktop should also be super performant. Scott's video showed the simple fact that Microsoft's data centers have a really serious high-speed network. So while you may be rocking a 40 megabit per second connection at home, which is fine for connecting and using Cloud PC and having a good experience, once you're on the Cloud PC itself, your desktop connection could be above 10 gigabits per second download speed. Though honestly, in Azure Virtual Desktop, which should be running in the same data centers, I have not achieved that download speed in Azure yet. So maybe that will depend on the region, I'm not sure. The fact that this is persistent means it should perform like a regular desktop and not be that complicated. They have clients on everything but Linux so far, but they say that is coming. For enterprise customers, they will require a full Active Directory domain that is Azure AD Hybrid Join enabled. For business, they need Azure Active Directory. In a Microsoft Mechanics video, Scott talked about the scenario of what about those people who need to connect to a share on their corporate network, and he went through the virtual network configuration to allow the Azure tenant to connect through to the corporate network. And I saw that the awesome Neil McLaughlin shared a really great YouTube video that he posted very quickly after the announcement that goes through some more details on this as well. So definitely check that out, and I'll share a link to that with this episode, which is episode 185 on 5bytespodcast.com. But to me, the coolest announcement is the Azure Active Directory Join feature. The Azure Active Directory domain services, to me, is needlessly complicated and expensive. I personally don't really like having a VPN running in my home lab for Azure. So this is what I have in my head. So I don't work for Microsoft. I'm definitely not designing the product, and it's not necessarily the best way to do things, but this is just kind of what I have in my head. So I would like to use Azure Active Directory, have my virtual desktops provisioned with the latest Windows 10 image in the Azure gallery, and automatically join my Azure AD domain. Then on startup, I'd have it install a couple of my agents on there. So I'm not putting those in the image, but on startup, it's configured once the device comes up. A couple of my agents will install on it, and also MEM will apply some policies that I set. Now I could use MEM for patching, but I think I'd personally prefer the option to just tear down the desktop each month and rebuild it, but that could depend on the data that's being stored on the desktop. If I could get my workflows to fit using OneDrive, Teams files, and SharePoint Online so that no data is stored on the Cloud PC, then that would be possible for me. I'd also need to do away with dependencies on archaic technology like map network drives so that I could tear away the need for that VPN connection, which would require me to pay for that resource consumption outside of the flat fee for just the desktop. And I kind of like the approach of tearing away the desktop each month and just having a rebuild or reprovision with the latest gallery in the image that should include that month's patches, because it will be like a brand new build each month and a refreshed desktop. So any rot that might creep into the desktop is also wiped away and it's a clean slate. But that's not necessarily a hard requirement. It's just something that I would like. It doesn't sound like that's what they expect you to do with this cloud PC offering. I think it sounds like you'd manage it just like a physical PC and you wouldn't need to rebuild it regularly. You would just manage the patches with mem each month, which is okay. I mean, people are used to that. Administrators all over the world are patching PCs that way, so at least it's familiar to people and it should be easy to do for most. But for me, I mean, even though you're just paying a flat price, I mean, you could just leave the desktop powered on all the time and just connect to it quickly whenever you like, I guess. But for me, I'd prefer to shut down my VMs at the end of each day to help Mother Earth with less power consumption. I don't know if they mentioned that. I didn't hear it mentioned, whether the desktop would power itself down after a certain idle time. I would like to think that it does, and they're looking at the climate impact from all this. Personally, I also would not like to deploy too many applications using mem. I prefer to have applications dynamically delivered. That might be possible to do with MSIX app attach, but I'm not that convinced yet on MSIX. The compatibility rate's not that great. I've posted a lot of blogs and I've mentioned cloud paging quite a bit. And I've used the Cloud Paging Content Delivery Network, which is their cloud-hosted subscription product. So if I could use that for delivering my applications, then I wouldn't need to do any image updates. I wouldn't really need to deploy anything using mem to the desktop when it comes up. The users could just launch the applications via the Content Delivery Network. Anyways, that's my technical rant over. I'm going to post a blog post on this topic, which I'll share with this episode, which again is episode 185. You'll find that on 5bytespodcast.com under reference links. And before I get away from this story, I noticed that the Wall Street Journal, the BBC, and many other mainstream news outlets picked up on this story about Windows 365, though some of the articles were kind of confusing to me at least, some focusing more on the angle of allowing you to consume Windows apps on Macs, iPads, and Android devices, which that in and of itself isn't exactly earth-shattering. You can already do that with a lot of different services. I think some of them maybe missed the point a little, but it's still cool to see some excitement in the wider mainstream media too.